Welcome, friends. This is episode 24 of the Found Christianities series. And today we'll be looking at the figure of Prodicus. Now, Prodicus probably flourished in the later second century, so about between 140 and 180, and probably in Alexandria. We don't hear of him practicing anywhere else, and his first reception is in Alexandria with Clement of Alexandria. In fact, really, almost his only reception is by Clement of Alexandria. And Clement doesn't know Prodicus himself, but he knows his disciples around 200. The only other person to mention Prodicus or Prodicans, that is, Prodican Christians, is Tertullian, who makes a comment on their resistance to martyrdom in his book, The Scorpion's Sting. What I propose about Prodicus and his disciples is that they were an early Christian group, a sect that survived in late second century Alexandria, and that Prodicans were the very people who inspired Clement to define what he meant by the true Gnostic Christian, because for Clement, true Christianity was Gnostic Christianity. And what he meant by that was something like informed or spiritually mature or intellectual Christianity. That is, the Christianity of the educated, the Christianity of those who had achieved a higher spiritual state. So Clement, in competition with the Prodicans, claims several things, and it's worthwhile getting to know what Clement claims about the Prodicans. Not that we believe everything, but that we try to understand it in its own context. So Clement says that the Prodicans called themselves Gnostics, and I take this in the non-technical sense of just they were saying they were knowers of spiritual and perhaps intuitive intellectual information that didn't make them superior to other Christians, but did in a sense make them better informed, better capable of knowing who they were, where they were going. And we mentioned before, or actually I'm not sure we did mention, so I'll just say now that the Marcelinians, that is the followers of Marcellina, who's the disciple of Carpocrates, is the only other known group directly to call themselves Gnostics, and they don't mean that in any kind of technical sense. So getting back to the Prodicans, they are, like several other Christian groups, the Marcionites, the Valentinians, and Sethians, they distinguish the primal God from the creator. We don't get the sense that the creator is necessarily bad, but we also don't have a lot of evidence about that. They, like many other Christians, saw themselves as children of the primal God, and so they are royal children, as it were. And this is very much part of the New Testament. In 1 Corinthians 4, Paul, sort of ironically, but not entirely facetiously, says to the Corinthians, already you have become kings, and sons of God or children of God is one of the most common designations that Christians call themselves. So nothing really out of the ordinary here. And they also view themselves as strangers and aliens in the world. Probably they had a notion of their souls being pre-existent. But I mean, in terms of the actual belief here, this isn't really different than what we find in other New Testament texts, that Christians consider themselves to be permanent residents, as it were, in a foreign land, and this is how they view the world. They don't really belong here. They belong in some celestial metropolis, and they're only here on tour. So what about practices? Well, again, virtually all of it comes from Clement, and all of it is his claim. So keep that in mind. Clement says that they discouraged martyrdom, and he gives the reason why. It's because they don't want an image of a bloodthirsty God, and they also don't want to give the impression that there's something wrong with Christ's own sacrifice. So if Christ's sacrifice is sufficient, Christians don't need to be losing blood to cover over any other remaining sins. So essentially, the motivation for martyrdom is cut out. Why this is important is because Christians, some Christian camps really took pride in martyrdom, and martyrdom was actually viewed as the ticket to heaven, the so-called baptism of blood, that someone with enough courage, if they underwent this, they would essentially become some kind of a saint or a hero, at least for a time. Churches were built after martyrs, and martyrs' bones or relics or remains were venerated at the time. This was part of the culture of ancient Greece and Greek heroes that went back thousands of years. So the Prodicans are pushing back against this idea. They are also, according to Clement, say that petitionary prayer is unnecessary. This one is an obvious one, I think, for anyone past the Enlightenment, that if God knows everything, you don't need to tell him what you need. That's not an absolute prohibition on prayer, and we wonder if they had any kind of meditation or contemplative prayer practice. We don't know. They also apparently use books ascribed to Zoroaster, and that's an interesting point, because we know that the Sethians, and specifically the text, the Apocryphal or Secret Book of John, quotes a book of Zoroaster, and which gives which describes the creation of Adam's body parts. There's also an Apocalypse of Zoroaster known in Rome about 250, and that is mentioned by Porphyry, who's a 3rd century philosopher and critic of Christianity. Obviously, during this time, Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, if you prefer, is a popular prophetic figure that's adapted, and people ascribe prophecies to him. Nothing really goes back to him, but apparently Prodicans used him as a prophet, at least equally, if not more worthy than the so-called Jewish prophets. The big thing that annoys Clement is that Prodicans claim that they're not subject to human laws. Now, Clement would like you to think that that means that they are completely antinomian, running around, God knows doing what, and awful things, so on and so forth. But one of the main reasons that people said, both in antiquity and throughout history, that they are not subject to human laws is because they don't need human laws to be good. Demonax, the cynic in the 2nd century, said that laws aren't necessary for bad people because they're going to break them anyway, and they're not necessary for good people because good people already know what to do and to do good, and they don't need a law telling them what to do. And that very much accords with a wider spread Christian sentiment that the law is not written for people who are good already. It's written for lawless people so that they can get punished. So in a sense, if you are spiritually mature and passionless and not governed by passions and not motivated at all to do anything wrong, then yes, technically you would not need human laws. And that seems to be what's going on. So far from being lawless or antinomian, I mean, you might argue that they're antinomian, but they're not lawless in the sense of doing bad things. In fact, they are doing probably extraordinarily good things, and therefore claiming they don't need any extra human motivation. Politically, this could also, of course, mean that they don't recognize human laws because they are strangers on this earth, and their only law is the law of God, or divine or natural law. Again, we don't get the full picture from Prodicans themselves because we only hear them through the heresiological echo chamber, as it were, in this case, Clement of Alexandria. And I cite all the texts in Clement that you'll need to find whatever he says about Prodicus in chapter 24 of Found Christianities. So I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for listening. This is just one more instance of another diverse Christian group, probably that you've never heard of, but who deserves to be known, if not loved, in the late 2nd century as competing with what became the Catholic Church in Alexandria. By the late 2nd century, there is no church that can really claim absolute dominance, and there are circles of Christians believing in all sorts of things, and the infighting continues. So just as it does today. And that's important simply to recognize that diversity and to then judge for yourself what are the claims of Christian truth given the great diversity of Christian beliefs. And that is, of course, one of the major messages of the Found Christianities book, which I hope all of you will have the chance to read at some point. For now, I thank all of you and wish you the best of all days or nights or whatever time you're listening. And I very much appreciate your support.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay